Hello, Chief Jones. How are you? I can tell from the announcements or press releases on the city's website that the police department's very busy. I have spent the past month recovering from hip surgery. It sucks. It's no fun. And I did send an email yesterday that you may or may not have understood, or it might have upset you. Um, but I thought I would take a minute to explain my concerns. We had a very rambunctious meeting last night with the stakeholders who were interviewed by the consulting team that Mr. Glasscock decided was needed and passed on to Mr. Seawood, who has been working on it, and they hired a team through the city manager's office through his discretionary ability to do that. So I would like to start there and just comment on process, protocol, policies, and people. I think that the city has a very different understanding of process than people do, that lay people do out in the community, particularly if you want to do something new or different. The way that the city does outreach, the way that the city communicates is not very transparent. So, for example, the hiring of these consultants, this issue was not brought to the council for input. Um, no, none of the stakeholder groups were consulted in advance to find out what we've wanted. And there's been a lot of talk about policing for a long time, listening tours, lots of data. It's been a problem for a long time. But in coordinating and putting that group together without consulting with the groups and not coming before the council, some of you have been in communication well before communicating with us. And what happened was that the protocols weren't shared, the process wasn't shared, the timeline wasn't shared. We had to make a public records request to get this information. Now, I understand that you were asked about it and you agreed and you were interested, but many of those conversations are held without us. So one thing that's different from a feminist perspective is you're always asking, are all the people that need to be at the table here in this decision-making process? And I think one of the things that the city does, because it's run by mostly all white men, is that you often make decisions with just yourselves. And you're not accustomed to seeking those kinds of consensus and coalition building work. And you make reports and do things in a performative way, and you're so surprised when you're critiqued. So it just seemed to me that that the community policing update report, which I think is not a good report, was silent on community policing values expressed by the community. And if it's community policing, those values should be expressed. And it didn't make sense to me that you would be agreeable to the stakeholders talking and getting this feedback, but produce a report that says that you don't know what the community stance is on community policing values. It may seem like a small thing, and I understand that you're always producing reports and stuff, but we don't know, for example, when you're going to produce reports. And when you produce reports that only can be discussed at a work session, since the public can't communicate, you're again limiting the kind of public input you're giving. A wise move would be to have sent your report out for feedback. But even before then, I would say that you need to have a process and develop some protocols for how you are going to put together a report. Um, I have an analogy about the report that I think I'll share. You know, one summer when I was younger, my brother Tavis, who's not living now, but he grew from 5'5" to 6 feet over a summer. And while he looked big and looked like an adult, he wasn't fully formed adult. He still needed a lot of guidance and a lot of support. I had to feed him a lot of food still when I visited him. He was still growing. And I look at the police department that way. It's you have a lot of young officers and they have a lot of maturing to do. And had any of them turned in that report to me, I would have told them to take it to the writing center and get some additional support and understand what it means to write a meaningful report. Um, in terms of how it was put together, you've got several different parts, 3 or 4 different sets of page numberings. There's not an index, there's not a table of contents, and I don't think that your executive summary is very strong. Those are tools that you really need in doing this kind of work. Um, so that's where I was coming from about that. And the reason I feel that way is that we weren't really in on the deal about the stakeholders, the consulting plan of community values, because it's centered on values that weren't important to the people that came to the table. They were somebody else's agenda. So I think one of the things that the city and the police department can do a lot better is being a lot more inclusive and transparent in their process. And it's my opinion, no, I could be very wrong, that you are very concerned about how your officers are perceived, et cetera. And you're not able to be as transparent as you like, because you've got to defend your officers, and that's problematic. So I think the public can handle truth, and I think that they learn a lot more from your department if you develop a practice of full disclosure. Even if your officers make a mistake or do something that you don't want people to see, people get a better, fuller idea of the context of what's happening when you have that kind of openness and vulnerability about the policing practices. And also it builds trust. So I've tried to make this as condensed as possible to respond to that. But that's partially where I was coming from yesterday. As a side note, the responses that the police department made to the president's task force on 21st century policing, particularly the first pillar, is a really important one to answer in a meaningful way about being guardians. And that question remains unanswered by the department, and is compounded by the Police Officers Association. It holds values that contradict community policing and contradict, to, as far as I'm concerned, basic human values of respect, particularly along the lines of cultural respect. So those are really part and parcel to concerns that people have about the way that they're treated and respected by the police. And finally, it's my opinion that the police should also be considered stakeholders, and then that includes city hall professionals to get their feedback on policing and the challenges and all that. All that also said, this is not a true qualitative process. It's very much a butchered hybrid that doesn't follow the protocols of a qualitative study or a qualitative practice, which is very much framed with core values around ethics and transparency, and there's a vulnerability as a big part of it, but your participants, you have an ethical commitment to your participants, and I definitely saw that in Dr. Kroner's response in our meeting last night. um, I'm not sure that I would have picked that team to be my quote unquote experts on qualitative practices, because none of them are experts. They also were secretive about who was the project manager, kind of like your report won't say this person's name or that person's name. We don't know who the person is you're going to be dealing with on campus for your VSR report. There's really no reason for these kinds of silences and opaqueness. Each one of them adds another layer of difficulty of following your process and what policies you say or claim that you're trying to work on. And I mean that just in a general way, not just you, but I mean like the city, et cetera. So, um, and with that is having people in place who are able to embody and instill those culturally relevant values and practices that matter, so people feel welcome and included in this community. And if we're not very good at making sure we have all the people at the right table at the right time, and that everyone has the same information, and that our information is integrated so that it's easily shared and accessible, and people have opportunities to give input or ask for input, and their input is listened to and heard. That makes a big difference too. So I hope this is helpful. It was longer than I wanted it to be, and I look forward to being able to talk to you sometime soon when you have a chance. Take care of yourself. When I see you look very tired, and I'm concerned about you. All right. Later.